My husband served me divorce papers in front of 82 people at his mother's birthday dinner. He placed the envelope beside my plate as if it were a gift, then smiled while his mother watched me from the other end of the table. I opened it, read the first page, and looked across the room at the lawyer who had prepared the papers. Then I asked him one question that changed the entire mood of that room. "Did Marcus tell you about the $1.86 million?" The lawyer stopped turning his glass. Marcus stopped breathing for a second. His mother dropped her fork. They had invited 82 people to watch me lose my marriage. They had no idea I had spent 6 weeks finding out what they were trying to take with it. If you enjoy stories about people who underestimate the wrong person, stay with me. And if you like quiet betrayals that eventually meet hard evidence, subscribe to Noir Reckoning. My name is Natalie Whitmore. I was 36, married to Marcus for 7 years, and I worked as a forensic financial analyst. Spreadsheets, transaction records, property filings, long hours staring at numbers that looked harmless until the pattern underneath them became impossible to ignore. I had spent years learning how money moved when someone wanted it to disappear. I never imagined I would need that skill inside my own marriage. Marcus and I had not always been unhappy. That's the part people leave out when they tell stories about betrayal. There's usually a period before everything goes wrong when the person hurting you is still the person you trusted most. Marcus remembered small things. He knew I hated cilantro. He knew exactly how much cinnamon I wanted in my coffee. When my father had surgery, Marcus stayed beside him until nearly 2 a.m. and drove home exhausted for work the next day. I loved that version of him, and for a long time I assumed the changes I noticed were temporary. The first strange thing happened 8 months before his mother's birthday. It was a Tuesday evening, and I was putting groceries away when I noticed our mortgage payment had come from an account I didn't recognize. The amount was normal. The account was not. I closed the refrigerator and asked Marcus about it. Without looking up from his laptop, he called it a business account, temporary, nothing worth discussing. When I pushed for which business, he finally looked up and said it was ours. I remember the way he said our. It sounded less like reassurance and more like a door closing. I wanted to know why our mortgage was suddenly running through an account I'd never seen. Marcus sighed, shut the laptop, and said I spent all day looking at financial statements and didn't need to audit my husband at night too. I wasn't auditing him, I said. I was asking about our money. His response came sharp and fast. "Why does everything have to become an interrogation with you?" I didn't argue. I put the groceries away and let the conversation die, but that sentence stayed with me long after he'd gone upstairs. Over the next few weeks, Marcus started talking about other people's divorces. A man at his office, an old college friend, a business contact protecting assets before a split. That phrase came up 3 times. The third time, I stopped eating. I asked why he kept bringing it up. He laughed and said that because I worked in finance, everything sounded suspicious to me. I told him that wasn't an answer. He kissed my forehead and walked upstairs, and I sat alone at the table wondering whether those conversations were really about other people at all. Then his phone changed. It was always face down now. Messages disappeared the moment I entered a room. He started taking calls outside, even in the cold. I noticed, but I didn't confront him. There's a difference between noticing something and being ready to accept what it might mean. Then our joint savings dropped by $24,000. I checked the statement twice before calling him into the kitchen. He looked at the page and said it was an investment. "Which investment?" I asked. "Not finalized yet," he said. "Then why send the money?" I asked. "That's how investments work," was his answer. I told him he was asking me to trust him while refusing to explain what he was doing with our money. He said he wasn't refusing anything. I asked him to just tell me. He said it was complicated. I almost laughed, because complicated was the one thing I knew how to untangle for a living. I reminded him I was a forensic financial analyst, that I could understand complicated. He stared at me for a long second and said I had a problem. That I always thought that because I understood numbers, I understood people. That landed harder than he probably intended. Years earlier, he'd told me that noticing patterns was one of the things he admired most about me. Now he was using the same quality as an insult. He walked upstairs. I stayed at the table, and something in me shifted. I stopped looking at our finances like a wife hoping for reassurance and started looking at them like an analyst who'd found an inconsistency. The $24,000 was only the first piece. I found another transfer for $11,800, then $9,200. Different dates, different descriptions, different receiving accounts. The amounts weren't identical, but the pattern was. Money was leaving our joint finances in pieces small enough to avoid attracting attention, often enough to create a trail. At the top of my first printed page, I wrote October 14th. I didn't know yet why that date mattered. I only knew I wanted to remember it. A week later, Marcus announced his mother was having a birthday dinner. 82 guests, formal photographs, a catered meal, business associates, enough flowers to make the ballroom smell like a florist shop. I asked whether 82 people were really coming to a birthday dinner. He laughed, but his expression changed when he told me I needed to be on my best behavior. I told him I knew exactly how he behaved when his mother was around. His smile disappeared. "Don't start anything," he said. "I'm not starting anything," I said. "Then don't make the evening about you," he said, a sentence I remember clearly, because I hadn't made anything about me. I didn't even know there was something to discuss. The following month grew stranger. Marcus changed passwords. Paper mail started arriving at his office instead of our house. Our joint savings kept shrinking, and whenever I asked where the money was going, the answer was always the same: business. One evening, I asked about the $11,800 transfer. He asked if I was monitoring his accounts. "Our accounts," I reminded him. His jaw tightened, and he told me I made everything exhausting. I told him I was only asking where our money was going. He said it was being handled. "By whom?" I asked. "By him," he said. The conversation ended there, but something inside me had changed. I stopped asking him for explanations and started collecting facts. Then Evelyn called. My mother-in-law had never been openly rude to me. She was far more skilled than that. Evelyn could make an insult sound like concern and a threat sound like advice. She opened by telling me Marcus had always been generous with me. I told her we both contributed to our household. She answered with a soft "of course" that somehow sounded like an accusation, then told me that if she and Marcus had made arrangements concerning family property, I needed to respect them. "What family property?" I asked. She wouldn't say it plainly, just told me not to pretend I didn't know. I genuinely didn't. Her voice went colder. "You shouldn't confuse being married to my son with being entitled to everything he owns," she said, each word placed like she'd rehearsed it in a mirror. I felt the room go very quiet. If she was trying to tell me something, I said, she should say it clearly. Her answer was that I should be grateful for the life Marcus had provided. I laughed once, not because anything was funny, and asked if that was the reason for her call. She said she'd called because marriages didn't always last. I stood up so fast my chair rolled backward and asked if she was telling me Marcus planned to divorce me. She didn't answer right away. I could hear her breathing. Then she told me I had no idea what I was up against. The call ended. I stood in my office for several minutes, watching ordinary traffic pass outside while the shape of my entire life quietly rearranged itself. I opened a blank spreadsheet and typed, Marcus, transfers, property, timeline. Then I entered every number I had. I didn't confront him. I called Rachel instead, an old colleague in corporate compliance whose judgment I trusted, and gave her a hypothetical without naming names. She told me to examine account ownership, transfer timing, related entities, beneficiary changes, property purchases, loans to family, and then gave me the detail that changed everything. "Don't trust the label on a transaction," she said. If it says property investment, find the actual property. If it says loan repayment, find the original loan. I opened Marcus's company records. The first receiving entity was Westbridge Holdings LLC. I didn't recognize it. The second was Westbridge Property Management, and I recognized that address immediately. It was Evelyn's home. My hands went cold. Westbridge had been created 11 months earlier, with Evelyn listed as registered manager. I pulled every transaction connected to it. $24,000, $18,500, $32,000, $11,800 and on. The total was $1,860,400. Not one transfer. Dozens. The pattern had started 6 months before Marcus first began talking about divorce. Then I opened the property records. 3 properties connected to Westbridge. One of them stopped me completely. Our lake house, the one Marcus had spent 2 years promising to renovate, the one where I'd picked the kitchen tile and saved a sunset photo for the mantel. Now Westbridge owned it, transferred 3 months earlier. The original purchase record still had my name, $138,000 of my own money toward it. And in a folder describing the Westbridge transfer as a private family loan, I found Marcus's signature, dated October 14th, the exact date I'd written at the top of my very first page. I called him. He answered on the 4th ring, sounding almost cheerful. "Who owns the lake house?" I asked. The silence lasted long enough for me to hear the refrigerator compressor click on behind me. "What do you mean?" he said. I asked again. "Don't do this over the phone, Natalie," he said. I told him I had the deed. His breathing changed. I asked why he'd transferred it. He said he hadn't transferred anything. I told him I had the records. "It's a business structure," he said. "Who owns Westbridge?" I asked. "It's complicated," he said. I told him it was actually simple. His mother owned Westbridge. Westbridge owned our lake house. Nearly $2 million had moved through it, and he wanted me to believe none of it had anything to do with divorce. He didn't answer. That was the answer. Then he told me I needed to trust him, that he'd been protecting the family. "From what?" I asked. He hesitated. Then I asked the question I'd been afraid to ask. Was he planning to divorce me? Silence. Then he said, "Not everything was about me." That sentence ended something. Not the marriage, not yet, but the part of me still hoping I'd misunderstood him. Before I hung up, he told me I had no idea what I was up against. This time I believed him. I just didn't think he understood what he was up against either. "If you were in my position, would you have confronted Marcus the moment you found the money, or stayed quiet and built the evidence first the way I did? There's a strange kind of strength in staying calm when everything in you wants to demand an explanation. Tell me what you would have done." I didn't confront him again. I went back to work, and for 6 weeks I did exactly what I'd been trained to do. Built a transaction map, every transfer tied to a date, every date to an account, every account to an owner, every property to a deed. I compared bank statements against corporate filings and property records, tracing money forward and backward instead of stopping at the first account that appeared on a statement. The $1.86 million wasn't sitting inside Westbridge anymore. It had moved again, some toward property, some into another account, and $410,000 had eventually returned to Marcus's own business under a completely different description. That mattered. The money wasn't being hidden. It was being circulated. Our marital finances were the starting point. Evelyn's company was the middle, and Marcus's business was one of the destinations. Money leaves patterns, no matter how many names you route it through. On the 4th morning, I found the loan. Westbridge had borrowed against the lake house after acquiring it, and the beneficiary listed was Marcus. He'd moved an asset out of the marriage, borrowed against it, and quietly moved the borrowed money back toward his own company. Complicated enough to confuse someone who didn't understand tracing. Clean enough to fool someone who didn't look twice. I looked 3 times. I called Rachel and told her everything. This time, she didn't treat it like a hypothetical. She told me I needed legal advice immediately. I found a family attorney who understood financial tracing and asset disclosure, chosen precisely because I didn't need someone to discover the problem for me. I'd already found it. I needed someone who could help me preserve it and protect myself while I decided what to do. He read through the folder slowly, without interrupting, moving from bank statements to property records, to the Westbridge filings, and finally, the loan documents. When he looked up, his expression had changed. Had I built this myself? He asked. Yes. How long? About 4 weeks of concentrated work, plus weeks of watching before that. He pointed to one transfer and asked why I'd flagged it. Labeled as a loan repayment, I said, but the receiving account had never issued a corresponding loan. He nodded, told me that was exactly why I needed to preserve everything properly, and asked whether Marcus knew I had the records. No, I said. Don't warn him, he said. I wasn't planning to. Then he found something I hadn't seen. Marcus's divorce paperwork. Not filed yet, but a draft his lawyer had already prepared, dated 2 weeks before my phone call to Marcus. One sentence stopped me cold. Husband anticipates that wife may attempt to claim assets she did not contribute to. I pulled the original lake house purchase records. $138,000 my contribution, dated March 12, 2019. The property purchased 2 days later. My attorney asked if I could prove the payment was mine. Yes, I said. That mattered, he said. So did this, I told him. The house had been transferred after my money helped buy it, and Marcus knew that. Evelyn knew that. That was exactly why they needed to control the story before I could tell mine. Then I understood the guest list. 82 people. Family, business partners, friends, everyone whose opinion mattered to Marcus and Evelyn. It wasn't a birthday dinner. It was an audience, assembled to establish their version of my marriage before I ever got the chance to tell mine, so I decided to let them. 6 weeks after finding the first transfer, I walked into Evelyn's ballroom wearing a black dress she'd once called too severe. Candlelight, white flowers, a string quartet near the windows. Marcus stood near the head table. Evelyn was surrounded by friends. 3 seats from me sat the lawyer who'd prepared the divorce papers. I hadn't told either of them what I knew, and I wanted Marcus to believe I still had no idea what was coming. For 20 minutes, nobody mentioned divorce. Evelyn gave a speech about family, loyalty, protecting the people you love, and then she looked directly at me, and I understood the speech had never been about her birthday. It was a warning. Marcus stood after dessert, raised his glass, talked about honesty, then walked toward me and reached inside his jacket. The envelope landed beside my plate with almost no sound at all, though I felt every person at that table notice it. He told the room he believed some conversations were better handled honestly. Then he said he was filing for divorce. He expected tears. Instead, I opened the envelope, read the first page, then the second, and looked across the table at his lawyer. I asked whether Marcus had told him about the $1.86 million. The lawyer's face changed instantly. Marcus went completely still. Evelyn's smile disappeared. "What money?" the lawyer asked. I reached into my bag, not a tablet, not a screen, but 2 physical folders, and set them side by side on the table in front of Marcus. The first held the story he wanted everyone to believe. The divorce draft, the property claims, the version where I looked like a wife trying to take what she hadn't earned. The second held mine. Original purchase records, bank statements, transfer confirmations, the Westbridge filings, the lake house deed, the loan documents, the entire timeline from the first strange payment to the last movement of the money. His version. Mine. Side by side, finally something physical for the whole room to look at. I walked the lawyer through the sequence without raising my voice. Money leaving our joint accounts, moving into Westbridge, Westbridge acquiring our lake house, Westbridge borrowing against it, Part of that borrowed money moving back toward Marcus's business. Marcus called them business transactions. I told him that wasn't an explanation. He said I didn't understand what I was looking at. I reminded him he knew exactly what I did for a living. I gave the lawyer the total. $1,860,400 moved through connected accounts. Nobody moved. Evelyn said I was twisting ordinary arrangements into something they weren't. I turned the Westbridge filing toward her and asked her to correct it if I had it wrong. She didn't touch the paper. I asked Marcus why the lake house transfer hadn't been disclosed in the divorce draft. Complicated, he said. The numbers aren't complicated, I told him. The room went so quiet I could hear ice shift in a glass at the far end of the table. The lawyer asked Marcus whether he'd provided all relevant financial records. Nothing. Whether he'd been told about the Westbridge transfers. Still nothing. Then the lawyer said plainly that he'd been retained to advise on a divorce, not to participate in concealing financial information. For 1 second, the man I'd married disappeared behind someone who suddenly understood exactly how much he'd risked. His shoulders dropped. His eyes moved from the papers to me, and for a moment he looked exhausted, almost lost. And I thought of the hospital hallway where he'd once sat beside my father until 2 a.m. For one brief second, I felt sorry for him. Then he looked at the folders and said the only thing he seemed to have left. "You don't have to destroy me over this." The sympathy disappeared. I told him I wasn't destroying anything. I was showing what he'd already done. He said I didn't have to take it this far. I asked how far he'd planned to take it when he prepared divorce papers without telling me. "The divorce is separate," he said. I placed my finger on the deed, then on the transfer record, and told him the property had become part of the divorce the moment he moved it out of our shared ownership. He said he was protecting himself. "From what?" I asked. He didn't answer. Then he said he was protecting the family. I looked toward Evelyn, who lowered her eyes. The first sign that even she hadn't expected the documents to end up on this table. I told Marcus the hardest part was never the money. It was that he'd spent months building a story about me while I was still trying to save the marriage. He said I was making him sound like a monster. I told him I didn't need to make him sound like anything. The records were doing that on their own. The lawyer picked up the documents and began turning pages, checking each one against what Marcus had told him weeks earlier. Evelyn stood. She said this family had taken care of me for 7 years. I looked at her and remembered every dinner where she'd made me feel like a guest in my own marriage. The phone call, the careful concern, the warning that marriages don't always last. I told her that for 7 years she'd made sure I knew I wasn't really part of this family. "That's not true," she said. I reminded her she'd told me Marcus was generous with me, that I wasn't entitled to what he owned, that I should be grateful for the life he'd built. I told the table that everyone had spent the whole evening expecting me to defend myself emotionally. I didn't have to. I had records. The room had changed completely. The people who'd watched Marcus hand me that envelope weren't watching my reaction anymore. They were watching him. That was the part he'd never planned for. I stood and gathered my papers. "Was I serious about ending the marriage?" Marcus asked. "I've been serious for 6 weeks," I told him. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. "I wanted to see whether you'd stop," I said. He hadn't. He asked if there was still a way to fix things. I told him there might be a way to resolve the finances, maybe even a way to forgive what had happened. But I didn't know if there was a way to become the woman who'd trusted him before all of this. His face changed. He said he was scared. I believed him. That was the painful part. He really had been scared. But fear didn't erase months of secrecy, didn't put the money back, didn't undo the divorce draft. I picked up my purse. Evelyn called my name, her voice smaller than it had been all evening. "Think about what you're doing to this family," she said. I looked at the 2 folders still lying side by side and told her I'd thought about this family for 7 years. Now I needed to think about myself. I walked out. The legal process didn't end that night. There were months of documents, meetings, and negotiations that no single dramatic dinner could resolve. The lake house became part of the formal asset dispute. The transfers were examined. Westbridge became a problem Marcus and Evelyn could no longer pretend didn't exist. But not everything resolved the way I once imagined. The lake house wasn't magically restored. Some of the money proved unrecoverable, and Marcus's business survived, though the people who trusted him started asking questions. Evelyn sold one property to cover part of the obligations. She never gave me the apology I wanted. Marcus apologized twice, once for the money, once for how he'd humiliated me. I accepted the second one. I didn't take him back. For a long time, I thought staying quiet meant I was being weak. Now I understand that silence can be useful when it protects the truth instead of the person who hurt you. I didn't need to shout across that birthday dinner or convince 82 people I was telling the truth. I put 2 folders on a table and let the records speak for themselves. Marcus thought the divorce papers would control the story. They didn't. The story changed the moment I stopped asking him to explain himself and started asking the evidence what it had to say. I still don't know what will happen to every dollar connected to Westbridge, whether Evelyn and I will ever speak normally again, or whether Marcus and I will ever reach any kind of peace that makes the past feel distant. Maybe I don't need to know. If you'd been sitting at that birthday dinner, would you have exposed everything the moment you found the money, or waited until you had every document in hand? Tell me what you would have done. And if this story reminded you of someone underestimated by the people closest to her, share it with them. For more stories about betrayal, quiet strength, and reckoning without the shouting, subscribe to Noir Reckoning.